So hi Kate, this is Kate Scott, painter. Welcome to our Zoom chat, Kate.
Thank you.
So
very nice to meet
you. So I'm just going to start by asking you about what you're working on at the moment with your paintings.
Right. Okay, so I'm working, I've just started a new very big one, or big for me, but which is behind me, and it's the last.
Quite big. What sort of scale?
100 by 100 centimeters, but actually just before that I finished one that was 120 by 100, which is a new size for me, or 100 by 120, and this is the last large bare canvas I have, because I need to order some more. And I'm stretching it out, but I'm doing loads of work on paper at the moment, small pieces, and yeah.
Has your work changed during the coronavirus lockdown? Have you had to adapt your way of working?
I think I have a bit. Yes, I have. I've been finding I need a lot more time, basically claiming I'm going into the garden a lot, making notes, listening to the birds, and just spending more time reflecting and just adjusting to sharing the house with other people. I'm used to being in the studio on my own, not hearing any sounds or anyone else, and sort of very private, and sometimes I'm struggling to focus because of that.
Yeah. So you were talking about going to the garden and listening to the birds. So nature is really important to your work.
Really important to my work, yeah. And more and more I realise the connections. Yeah. So I mean, I talk about it being in sort of internal elements, external and internal elements that I'm sort of thinking about in my work. So it's stuff that I see and I feel, and the crossover between those two things. But interestingly, you asked, has my work changed? I mean, obviously we're going to look back at this and see, but the one that I finished recently, the large one, I'm going to call it Transgressions, because it's sort of very bordered and boundaried, but it has one little bit that just sticks out across two boundaries, and the rest of it's very tightly boundaried, and I feel that's sort of somehow symbolizing feeling like you not daring to go out of your lines, and I only feel I can express myself fully and sort of energetically on a very small level, which I might grab a couple to show you if you want to.
Yes, please do.
So I've been sort of doing, I'm just going to show you a couple. I don't know if that's filling the space.
The light's kind of reflecting on it a little bit. Can you, just that, just over, if you just kind of move it around a little bit. It was just the way that.
Show you one or two.
That's that's okay. We can see it there. It's beautiful.
Basically, I think as I speak to you, that I feel maybe that's what's going on, that the internal space of a small piece is where most of the activity is going on, in a small space, and that's reflective of what our life is at the moment. So I don't know if, I mean, I've always worked on small, but I think it's partly sort of stretching out my resources of my canvases. So I'm doing more little things and more small work.
I mean,
and also
that is an issue. Sorry to interrupt. That's a real issue, isn't it, at the moment? That there is a concern, I think, for artists that we may not be able to access to buy materials, that we might have to kind of eat them out or work slightly differently, and that's not something certainly I've ever kind of experienced before. I've always kind of like just trusted and had faith that whatever I needed to use was kind of there, and I could just kind of get it. But I think I think we're so sort of in the middle of this kind of new world, aren't we? The restrictions and the lockdown, and I'm sure it will change all our work, but maybe we're too kind of in it at the moment to really know what that will look like. Maybe that's going to be a process.
Absolutely. But interestingly, I was watching Grace and Perry's Art Club last night, the first one. I've only watched one. And one of the artists, who's a portrait artist who's done a picture every day for the last year, was talking about running out of materials. And I was partly thinking, well, you could send off online, but it was almost like she wasn't really talking about that. But she was saying she thought that art came to its true senses when it was limited down and when you didn't have so much. And I actually think that's quite true. And that once I was making a card in this room, and I was in the moment, and I didn't have many things with me, and I used some cut up newspaper to make a collage, and I just had a few other little pencils, and the thing I just focused, so I had so few things to work with, and yet I made something quite powerful.
Yeah.
So it's a similar thing. You end up, you've got less stuff, but it becomes more intense what you're.
Maybe you can get you can create in a different way, or you become more creative because you start to see materials that you wouldn't necessarily, like a newspaper. Yeah. Maybe there's something slightly kind of freeing, or certainly something really interesting about that, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, once you get going, you don't want to move. So sometimes even to move to try and find some different colours or materials, I'm scared it's going to break the spell. So I'd rather sit down and work with what's just around me than break the spell and go off somewhere.
So tell me about your material. What materials you normally use? So you're a painter.
A painter, and for many years, sort of when I was at art school and for years afterwards, I worked with oil on canvas, and then and had big studios in London. And then after having children and trying to work from home and working from home towards an exhibition when my first child was very little, I decided it was less toxic to use water-based. So I had this exhibition planned with oil paintings, but then I finished off working on work on paper. And ever since then, I've been developing using gouache, mixed media, and acrylics, learning to use acrylics, and I really enjoy it now. Recently, I've been thinking about exploring oil again, just to see what it does for my work. But I'm very aware of the toxic quality to it and the solvent.
It's a real concern. I mean, I work with oil, but I'm really thinking about moving away. I'm not using turpentine or some of the mixes that I used to use anymore, because I think there is more evidence coming through about their potentially harmful properties. But I think you seem to your work has got that real richness and lushness that you associate with oil paint. So I think you can get the qualities that we would associate with oil from water-based acrylic paint, can't you?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I don't know if that's always true. I try my best. I'm often. I mean, I think that because I've been working water-based for so long, I've got very used to quick drying layers.
Yeah.
And I'm, rather than manipulating a wet paint, I'm more likely to layer and try to create the depth and the movement by more and more layers, different colors, with adding mediums to that. But you still sometimes find it dries quite flat. So it's an ongoing process, learning how to create.
Do you mix your paint with any mediums? So because there are acrylic mediums that will add more sort of gloss or depth.
Yeah. I have one that has like a body, creates a bit more body, not texture, but sort of thickens up the paint. And I have some glossing, flowy glazing as well. And I sometimes will also gloss on top of certain sections if I want them to have the same look they had when they were wet, to get a contrast when the tones are very close. Yes. Yeah.
So how do you start a painting? So you've got your canvas. I'm just thinking about some of your recent ones, maybe some of the big ones, so 100 by 100 or 100 by 120. You're in your studio, you've got your materials. What's the start? How do you start making a mark on that black canvas?
I literally mix up intuitively a colour and just make a mark. Literally.
Any particular colour or mark, or is it that's a very intuitive process? Is it? It's just
it's just that it's random. It's, you know, sometimes I'll be working on a small thing and there'll be a big one waiting, and I suddenly think this is an amazing colour, and I will just go start with it. But the colour I start with is very rarely intended to necessarily stay, although sometimes it does. And it's just, you know, a flash of gold at the top, or and I start working around the edges, particularly with the larger pieces, and working my way in, and then out and in.
You start from, that's really interesting. So you start from the edges and work.
Sort of.
Okay.
And I sort of clarify and simplify, and then go back in again. It's like a little dance, back and forth, back and forth. Yeah.
Do you work on just the one painting at any one time, or do you have more than one on the go?
I have usually a few on the go. Maybe one quite small one. Like at the moment, I've got a very small little canvas alongside my large canvas and watercolours. So I found it takes the pressure off. If I get too stuck on one, I can get precious and also stagnant with it.
I totally get that. And I think sometimes you get to a point with a painting where you've been working on it so intensely you just can't see it, can you? You really need some distance. You need to put it against the wall, and you can
really overkill. I mean, I sometimes turn them round, and I will take another space to have a look at them. There's another room in the house where there's a dark green wall, deep green, olivey green, and everything looks very different. It gives you a different perspective, or I'll turn them round or something like that. Yeah.
And could you say how long it would take you to finish a painting, or does it really depend? I mean, I know if anybody asked me that question, I'd find it really hard to answer, because
it really
be different.
I've got this very weird mixture. So I love the feeling of freshness, like a watercolour, when you can see the canvas coming through. And I very rarely manage to hold on to that. Although recently I have finished one, quite large one, where I have managed to hold on to that. So, you know, it could be many sessions over two or 3 weeks, but there are other paintings that will be over months. So literally 4 or 5 months. Leave it, come back to it. I'll leave it at the stage where it's kind of working compositionally. With something lacking. There's something, usually something emotional, and it just is not, it's just flat. There's something missing and I can't quite work out what it is. So I go away and I work on something else, then come back to it.
And so it sounds like nature is a theme that runs through your work, and that I love that kind of like that connection between the external, so the kind of nature in the real world, and internal. Can you say a bit more about that? Because I think that's really, really fascinating and really key to the very spiritual, what I see, the very spiritual content of your work.
It's very difficult to find words to express that, but I suppose I'm working on large areas often that are almost like places of rest within the paintings. So I'm trying to create a softness that's a bit like, it's either like looking at a clear sky or a very gently cloudy sky, or if it's myself, it's like a breath, or taking a breath, or feeling peacefulness inside myself. So when I'm outside and I'm relaxing and I'm listening to the birds, or closing my eyes and feeling the sun, that it's that feeling of restfulness and peace. So there's normally something in this painting that reflects that, but other times it could be a turbulence. and the turbulence is often an emotional one. But then when I look at it, really quite soon afterwards, I see that it reflects something in nature, like could be clouds, or it could be the waves on the sea that I've been looking at, or so it's a real mixture of that, you know.
Really
I mean,
interesting, and it's kind of
sorry,
Kate, no, go on.
Some of it's just really obvious when I realise. It's like there'll be dangly bits over the top, and they'll remind me of like branches hanging down, or clouds passing across the sky. Sometimes it, you know, can be quite literal, but I'm not aware of it. And while I'm painting, I'm just working in, you know, layers and patches of colour, and then afterwards, when I look, I see that they're reminding me of, you know, the composition is picking up on things that I've seen. Or, yeah.
Do you need to kind of have a regular kind of connection with nature? Do you need to be in nature to kind of like feed your work? Is it in?
Well, ever since I did the Artist's Way, to sort of find my way back to painting more seriously after quite a long break, which we're going to have a talk about as another conversation. But and I do try to do my pages, which is this journaling that you do, three A4 sheets most days, and I tend to do that on my garden bench, even in a cold, even in the rain. Even I'll sit in the shed with the door open. I just don't feel right if I do it inside. So I'm sure the connection with nature and the light is a way that I set myself up to start to come into the studio. So mostly, there are other times where I start painting in the night, because I just walk into my studio and I just see something in the outer corner of my eye and I want to paint. But yeah, it definitely is true that I need that connection, and that's probably something I didn't used to do consciously when I was a younger painter.
Yeah,
I don't think I was aware that I need, you know.
It sounds like you've kind of really internalized the emotions and the feelings that you get from nature. So even if you're not actually in nature, you've got that memory, you've got that kind of like, you know, that connection, that spiritual and that kind of psychological connection with nature. Has that always been true of your work, or has that changed with time?
I think I've become more aware of the nature, and it's the ephemerousness, I don't know how to put it, but the change, the intangible quality, the way the light changes, and I think it used to be maybe more interior spaces that were coming through before, architectural or interior spaces, harder edged, yeah, and now mostly there's more of a flow going on, more of a sense of movement and flow, and flux. So yeah, I think I'm more aware, and I think it's sort of in terms of needing it for myself, because I'm going into nature every day to replenish myself. That's coming through in my art.
Yeah.
When
did you, because I'm just thinking about you as an abstract painter, and I guess none of us really started out as abstract painters, did we? I mean, some of us may have, I think I made that shift quite kind of early, but I think it's a bridge that we all have to make. We have to cross that bridge, don't we, into abstraction. Can you remember at that time when your work changed into
yeah, well, I when I did my foundation course, I absolutely got madly into life drawing relatively early on, and I just couldn't stop. They allowed us to just do whatever we wanted. They didn't. It was in those days. They didn't you didn't have to go through different, you know, learning everything. We just were like, if they saw you were enjoying something, they would just let you. So I just draw every single day, and went from being quite polite to going quite expressive really fairly soon, and really big.
What with your life drawing? So they change in the process of doing foundation from kind of quite small and constrained to big and expressive.
Very rapidly, from being all about observation to suddenly being about the mark making and the emotion, and no sense of composition, just always a figure in space. And one of my favourite painters is Francis Bacon, and I think possibly quite subliminally very you know, inspired by that or whatever. They became more and more. I started using oil paint on unprimed paper and using a palette knife, and they were getting more and more sort of visceral and vicious and kind of quite ugly at times. And that's when one of my tutors came to me, this amazing, the tutor head of course, he just said, well, you've got something to say, you need to do fine arts. I didn't know what I was going to do at the time. I just knew I loved painting. So I did these figures. And then when I got into my painting degree, they realized I was pretty reliant on this figure, and that I was sort of hanging all my angst and all my expressiveness and my color onto the human form, but maybe they could see that there was more to come. So they stopped, didn't let me use life drawing a lot for the first few months. And then we had quite a formal training of perspective, landscape, architecture, windows, out of windows. We'd go to the zoo, we'd sketch animals, we'd take photographs, just loads of stuff. And it just started being about colour and painting.
So colour, it sounds like that's when colour, because I see colour as being absolutely essential to your work, and you know the beauty of your paintings is very much the colour kind of, you know, the relationships between the colours that you use, and is absolutely key. You use colour so beautifully, so well. Is that intuitive, do you think, Kate, your use of colour? Or?
It is, definitely. I mean, I look back, I think I've done something different, and I'll look back by chance on some old work and I'll see certain relationships coming up, and a language. It's like a language of a palette, and sometimes I think I feel sad about that, or I think it's maybe boring to the eye, but then I think most painters, like a composer or writers, we have our palettes, and it's just who we are, and it's hard to manipulate it. I change it sometimes, so occasionally it works, and I completely, you know, I'm losing a lot of greens and pinks at the moment, and pale blues, but I have tried
they're
to
the colours that I really associate with your work, actually, the greens and the blue. There's a certain blue that I think of in your work. It's a beautiful,
it's instinctive
blue.
And I can't, there are times when I'm desperate to do like a red painting or a, you know, but I start and
it's just not
probably every 15% of paintings might stay to red, or 10 pink, but mostly they'll end up in the earth, nature and earth tones at the moment. So
I think that's really fascinating, isn't it? I think it's, I mean, I really can relate to that, and I think it's just incredibly kind of unconscious, isn't it, how you use the colour. They just feel right, don't they, the colours that you
use. What about you with your colour? Is it similar?
I tend to use very sort of earthy kind of colours, but recently I've been using a kind of a turquoisey greeny bluey, which isn't it's not a colour that I use a lot, but it's just been really pulling me. I don't know what that's about, and I just think, just go with it, just, you know, I just never, something I never ever stress about is colour. I just just go with whatever the painting's telling me with colour. So it's not something I ever really give any thought to, actually. I really don't give much thought to it at all. That's the least sort of decision making I make is the colour. That's just pretty sort of intuitive.
That's interesting.
Thinking about, you talked about Francis Bacon, Kate, and I think he was such a colossus, wasn't he, for all of us? I mean, I know he massively influenced me. What about other influences? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about the abstract expressionists when we have our art class.
Honestly, such a really, really wide range of painters. So if we go back to abstraction, when I literally really young first went to the Tate when I was about 15 at school, it was Rothko. I fell in love with Rothko. I went into the room at the Tate, and
do you remember that time? That time in the Rothko room, because I do. I was about 15 as well, maybe a bit older, and it's a kind of a memorable experience, isn't it?
For being gobsmacked and understanding why people stood for ages immersed in one painting. I sort of suddenly understood why, you know, people were so obsessed, why people loved abstract painting and how powerful.
Yeah.
I had a problem with it. I was brought up by a mother who really appreciated contemporary art and had collected art and had abstract paintings and figurative paintings. So I think I had a very open mind to it already. But yeah, so I loved Rothko, but also I adore Rembrandt and Titian. So Rembrandt, I've always loved the way he paints. It is exquisite, his sort of quality of line and his light.
Self-portraits are just unbelievably moving, aren't they?
They are amazing.
So,
You could
so
drown in,
beautiful.
and the darkness and the intimacy, and that's also very expressive. And if you zoom into them, they could be a part of one of your paintings. They're just so abstract.
Well, I know. I mean, he was a massive influence on me. I went to the Reich Museum last year for the first time, and there was an exhibition of Rothko, of his self-portraits, I think, or was it just a retrospective? Anyway, there was just hundreds of them, and they were absolutely mesmerizing. They really are. And I think, but on the surface, a very different painter to Rothko, isn't he? But actually, there are, I think, some real similarities between them. That spiritual.
It's about how they hold you, and they create a certain mood. And so, who else would I love? I love Stanley Spencer. The way he paints. I love Lucian Freud.
I mean, they're very different painters, aren't they? Stanley Spencer to somebody like Rembrandt, or kind of putting Rothko and Rembrandt in the same category. But there's something very forensic about the way that they paint.
It's about a feeling. It's about a feeling that they put across. And I can't put my you know, I can't think of the right word. Work out.
I know exactly what you mean.
And I suppose, you know, I love Edward Hopper as well, and I adore. Yeah, so I mean, I could go on. We could have a whole conversation just on painters I love and why.
I do really think. I mean, I'm kind of cheating here a little bit, Kate, because I know we've had so many discussions about this. But the American abstract expressionists like de Kooning, are really key, aren't they? To
I was in touch recently by chance with an old tutor from my degree that I recognised the name, and he was trying to work out who I was, and I told him what I'd done, and I said, well, in my second year I went to New York, and it felt like an injection of steroids into my system that gave me like an athlete. I was given this absolute shot of power. And I fell in love with de Kooning. Obviously, he's my love, my favourite painter, pretty much. But also, you know, Clifford Still, and some big Matisses, some Picassos, some Diebenkorn. I adore Richard Diebenkorn, Pollock, you know, Helen Frankenthaler, just all those incredible abstract expressionists. I just feel so lucky.
Did you go to the MoMA when you were in your second year?
I went to the Metropolitan, I went to the Guggenheim, and I also went to loads of the private galleries and managed to get them to show me work that they had behind the scenes. And I was on my own a lot.
Fantastic experience.
It was incredible, and I just sort of suddenly realised what was possible, and I came back and started making massive canvases.
So it really changed your scale, did it? It really changed.
Yeah.
I guess they're huge, aren't they? You look at de Kooning or a Robert Motherwell or a Rothko or a Helen Frankenthaler's work was vast.
Yes, and I just felt this sense of ambition that I was and I just didn't feel frightened, and I was really happy to do them. It's wonderful. I was lucky to be in an art college where they had all the equipment and the matricinery and cheap, you know, affordable materials so that you could make really large work.
So after that trip to New York, the scale of your work, the ambition of your work really changed.
Yeah, I mean, I still always did some smaller pieces. I've always worked on this particular sort of roughly A4 square size. I haven't ever done very many large works on paper, but I'm thinking about having a go actually in the next few weeks. but yes, so I've always done these studies, which I don't think are related, and then when I look back, I see they're very related, but I just don't realise it. But yeah, I just loved working on large paintings, and I would just spend weeks and work in series, usually maybe a pair
you tend to work in series.
Yeah, and there would often be two that were in the same, same story going on.
And has that been a persistent way of working for you, that your work is in kind of a series of?
Although it doesn't always happen. I mean, sometimes there'll be one that's very different and not like anything else. But yeah, usually I'll start with maybe two. I mean, the thing we haven't talked about, maybe you're going to ask me, is music. That's really massive for me.
Yeah, I know. Classical music is often the kind of the start, isn't it?
It's classical music mostly, but I also used to listen to a lot of jazz when I painted, and sometimes contemporary music as well. But
do you always listen to music, Kate, when you're painting?
I'm trying to remember when I worked when I was an art student. I must have been not that easy, because you had open studios, so it would have annoyed other people to have had my own music all the time. So maybe not so much then.
Yeah, God,
but as soon as
actually, I do remember those shared studios at art college, where if somebody had totally different kind of musical taste to you, I remember for a while sharing a studio with somebody that wanted to listen to Radio 1 all afternoon.
Yeah,
it was just I just couldn't stand it. It was like pop and oh God, just really inane kind of DJs and stuff like that, and I just couldn't work. I just couldn't get over it.
And I once paid to have in a big shared space in an Acme studio in London, to have my the edges of my studio extended to the ceiling, the boundaries, because it was about protecting other people from my noise as much as anything else. I just didn't want to hear someone else working or talking, or it's really important to have my own private space. But also I think it's very interesting how so for me, I don't listen to the spoken word very much, because it takes me into a narrative part of my mind that I don't really connect with my painting. So the abstraction of classical music, or it can be film music or jazz, that's what helps me to tune a certain part of my brain.
So I'm just thinking kind of practically. So because I also really need music when I work, and I just use Spotify a lot, and I've got different playlists for different moods. Is that a similar process to you? How do you choose your music?
It depends. I do sometimes use Spotify, but I sometimes just listen to good old classic FM, which can go down the kind of slightly overly romantic mode, or Radio 3 occasionally gets a bit heavy going, so I play around a bit. Or sometimes I will just have a really strong instinct that I want one thing. For instance, there was War and Peace fairly recently. The BBC had this incredible music, the theme music, that was really powerful and emotive and gorgeous.
I watched War and Peace. It was wonderful. But those Russian composers had so much emotion, didn't they?
And
such an
get me straight to that place. I find music sort of weirdly, as a painter, I find it the most emotional, evocative, visceral of all the art forms. I just unfortunately don't do it myself, or don't have
I totally
agree. It so touches me, and I couldn't live without it.
Almost more instantly than painting. I mean, obviously, I love painting. You love painting. It's it's kind of what we do, and we totally get the emotional, the spiritual kind of like aspects of it. But I think music can just kind of get you right to your core instantly, can't it?
It creeps up on.
I've got absolutely no talent for it whatsoever. I agree. It's absolutely vital for my art practice to listen to music. And something I've actually found a bit difficult in lockdown is, like, normally when I'm in my studio in the day, I know that all my neighbours are out, everybody's out, and I've got the house to myself, and I play really loud music.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but there's times when I'm really in that zone, in that flow, and I just want it really, really loud. And I'm aware at the moment that because I'm living in quite a, you know, urban area, it's like we're all a bit back to back where I live. There's not a lot of space, and actually I just don't feel I can do that. So my music's really quiet because I don't want to disturb all my neighbours and my, you know, daughter who's at home as well doing her degree. But I really miss that really loud music.
Yeah, I think it's because you drowned out the other things that can distract you as well if you have it quite loud. I know it probably annoys my family when I have it on as well, because my studio is off my kitchen, so I sometimes hear them put on some counter sound quite loud in the kitchen because they're finding mine a bit annoying. Yeah.
So what's your routine for working? Do you have set times in the week, set days to be in your studio?
I mean, I have 2 days a week that I work doing a different job, working as a counsellor at a women's health organisation, and then the 3 days, and I still wouldn't say I had totally settled to what my routine is, and there's a lot of judgment inside me about how long I should paint, when I should paint, and when is the best time. And I've always had this sort of story about myself that I'm very nocturnal, which is true. I'm very creative in the evening. I often paint from 4:30 till 7 or 8, or have some food and then carry on. But relatively recently, I've started coming in the morning. I'm still learning. I mean, without going into too much detail, I was a carer for my father for 10 years. He had depression and I didn't paint much. And it took up a lot of my emotional and physical energy. And I'm still adjusting to not having that role and having the space inside myself to choose to do what I want to do with my time. And I'm learning, and it's getting there. But because I didn't paint for ages, most of the time I just think, if I'm giving myself a hard time and thinking I'm not painting enough, I just think, you didn't paint at all for years. Well done, you're doing it, you know. And I love it, and I feel compelled to do it, and I would not stop doing it, even if someone said, no one's going to look at your pictures ever again, or it's my expression. It's
how was it though? Because this is something that we've talked about, and I can certainly relate to, with a very similar kind of story about many years of not painting. What was it like, kind of coming back to it again after that long break?
Great big conversation that we can go into another time, really, but just beautiful, like coming home, and a relief, really, like a relief. Yeah. And I always used to do some work. I used to design these cards every year for Christmas, and I've got this sketchbook that spans over about 16 years, and it was like there was one intense, proper full-on painting in this sketchbook, layered, you know, really involved. I'd do one painting, I don't know why or how, there's no particular rhythm as to when it would happen. I just used to sometimes do a painting.
Did you have a space though?
I had a space in the loft of my last house from about, I don't know, 2006 or 7, I'm not quite sure, but I had no practice, and I thought I didn't have the emotional energy, but I felt constantly guilty about it. And now looking back, if I could go back to myself, I would say Kate, put some music on, make a cup of tea, shut the door, it's going to make you happy. But I just didn't know that. I didn't understand. I thought that I felt so brain dead. I used to just go and sit and read magazines, or go into a shop and stare into nothingness, and I just didn't seem to have the energy to be creative. And looking back, I think I could have got back into my painting earlier if I just understood how much it was going to benefit me.
But I think it's really, really hard for women, isn't it? I mean, I think if you've got young children, you're a carer as well, to find that space in your life, to find the kind of the practical space, the time, the emotional energy, it's not easy, is it? And I think if I could go back and talk to my younger self, and all those years when I wasn't really painting very much, and like you, I always kept it kind of ticking over, I'd tell myself not to feel so bad about it, because hopefully life is long, and if I had known then that now I would be painting, I was going to say full-time, I'm not painting full-time, but it's got a big space in my life again, which it didn't for many years, I think I would kind of like have felt better about it all. I think I gave myself a really hard time about not painting. It's just kind of impossible for me for a long time. And I think that's a story for women, isn't it? Bringing up children, and you, of course, you had that carer responsibility for many years as well.
Yeah, and I wouldn't regret any of it. It was fantastic. I loved it, and I think also the stress that was upon me mentally from having that role led me to learn some things, like I sort of did a mindfulness course, and then I did the Artist's Way, and I was finding ways to deal with my anxiety, anxiety and stress. And I think that those things took me back to myself and gave me the incentive to paint again as well.
And I wonder if it changed your painting, having gone through that experience, being a carer for so many years, having children.
It did a bit. I mean, the thing that really changed my painting, because I found the language didn't change because I wasn't painting enough for many years. Weirdly, after my father died, the colours went completely madly vivid. I was almost ashamed. I just thought, they look joyful. But I think it must be some sort of release, that I was free and I could explore. And
you could see that your palette changed after your dad.
It went really bright, really mad, really expressive, and quite over the top, and lots of yellow, and almost gaudy at times. Very strange. I sort of felt, what on earth's going on there,
Just to me,
but what I was going to say was that painting more regularly, more and more regularly, then my style of my work really started changing, because I was, moving through things and responding. And that made me feel a bit strange, like, wow, if you'd been consistently painting all these years, what would your work be like?
I often get those thoughts, Kate, and I try not to go down that road too much, because I can get moments of a real sadness and regret, and think if I hadn't have had, like, what was it, nearly 20 years really in effect of not painting, but not painting seriously, where would I be now? But I just think that down that road is it's a dead end road, isn't it? Whenever I start to go down that road, I try and bring myself back quickly from it.
There's nothing we can do about it, and you still meet people that say, if only, or I never could, or I don't have time, and we've gone through that, and we've come out the other end. So that's really good, and it's really positive.
And I do think that we are in a really exciting time for women artists and for older women artists. I think there's been a real sea change, hasn't there, away from younger male artists, and suddenly this is a time for older women, and it's really, really exciting.
And I'm again keep wanting to list all the ideas for podcasts. We'll have to go through this and note them. You and I had this amazing artist trip down to Cornwall, and we went to Falmouth for the day, discovered this incredible exhibition, didn't we?
Winifred Nicholson and Rose Hilton.
And both of them were painting into their 80s, and they were powerful and vivid, and we were both almost in tears.
They were so moving and spiritual, and they were both women that had been in their younger years, had been completely sidelined by their husbands, hadn't they?
They were both
were bringing up the children, basically, weren't they? Where their husbands, Ben Nicholson and Roger Hilton, were in the limelight. So that, I think that was a really, really important moment for you and I, wasn't it? Because I think that was for me in a way, was when I was just getting back into kind of painting more seriously after a break, and just seeing what those women were doing right up until their kind of like 80s was
inspiring.
So incredible.
Yeah.
And it just made me kind of realise all that life experience, all those years that we've had as women, as mothers, as carers, as partners, all our other life will all get it. That's all. It goes into our work, doesn't it? It's grist for the mill of our work. It's not irrelevant. It's not unimportant. Our work is about our lives as women, directly or indirectly.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's very thought. I mean, the more you start to look for that, the more you see it as well. And you know, lots of artists. You know, there are the odd, quite a few that probably never, like Georgia O'Keeffe or someone like that, who I don't think she had children, and she always painted consistently. There's obviously quite a few people like that, but yeah, there's a lot of people, and people are not household names at all who have had a similar path to us.
I'm just thinking,
and there are male as well who've had other careers who start painting.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it is a particular story for women, isn't it? I was just thinking about Lee Krasner as well. She had a retrospective in London recently, didn't she? She was another woman that was very kind of sidelined.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a really good time to be a woman artist, isn't it? And to be our age as well.
Definitely, yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, Kate, about the kind of the open, because obviously this is a really difficult time for artists, and you are really well established within the Brighton Open House kind of movement, and have had some beautiful open houses. I know the last one, Art at Serbs, was absolutely gorgeous, and it's something you've done really since you returned to painting yearly, haven't you? You've had a really strong presence in the Brighton Open Houses. So just wondering what the kind of the future is at the moment for showing your work. Obviously, it's all on hold.
Yeah, I know that it's planning to proceed in the autumn, but we're not 100% sure. So it's supposed to be happening in October, and I'm not sure about the Lewis Art Wave, which in August, which I did for the first time last year. I mean, I do feel a bit like I'm treading water, and I need to get some other opportunities to show work. So, you know, I have had some other exhibitions, like 2017 I had one in Cornwall, which is when we went together, but I do definitely want to show more places, so it's quite a long gap between now and October, so there's nothing majorly in the pipeline because everything is up in the air at the moment. But yeah, hopefully there'll be other opportunities as well that I can create for myself the next few months. I do miss it. I mean, being given the opportunity to be in the open house when I wasn't even really painting properly again, that pushed me back there probably faster than if I hadn't had that opportunity. So.
Yeah, because the opportunity was there, so you then needed to have paintings to show. I
had to make some new work, so body of work.
I think it's just it's really strange though, isn't it? I mean, I love May in Brighton. It's my favourite time of year because I absolutely adore going to the open houses, seeing your work, and it's just such a lovely, it's great, it's unique, and it's a very kind of strange experience for us all at the moment. I think artists that participate and just people like myself that just really enjoy kind of visiting them, and it will pass, won't it? It's it will change, it will pass, but
when you start to feel sorry for yourself, there's no point because everyone's in the same boat. So
does that really help? I mean, I think it does, doesn't it? It's like it's
some
really
people,
nothing personal. You're not the only person that's had your exhibition cancelled. Everybody's had their exhibition cancelled. Yeah.
And for some people, it's more important. Sorry. That they make a living out of it, and it's far more stressful to them. Whereas I'm lucky that's not my main source of income. And so
I think
I don't feel like but some people are really having to desperately, find ways to keep their money, the income coming in from their painting, and it's really difficult.
Have you done the artist support pledge?
I have, yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good initiative, isn't it? I mean, I do hope, I wonder, I think it's too early to say because we're so in the middle of it, but I think when we come out of this kind of very strange time, hopefully there will be some positive things that have come out of it as well, and there'll be new ways of communicating, of sharing work, of getting our work sold and seen. And it's difficult at the moment, but I think also, it will be okay. It will be okay.
Yeah, and I think even what we're doing now, getting used to working, communicating on screen through this medium rather than just over the phone, is making us more comfortable, because as you and I have been discussing broadcasting or making some sort of podcast for ages, so we may not put our act together if it wasn't for having to start doing Zoom with other people.
I think I've just got very comfortable and familiar with Zoom, whereas like when we first started talking about doing this, it just felt terrifying and really unfamiliar, and felt really self-conscious. And I think it's just a process of just doing it, and it just becomes familiar, doesn't it? It's not so scary anymore.
And it's just really important to have the opportunity to have these conversations, because we can't see it, so it's really positive. Great questions, thank you.
There was just one last question that I wanted to ask you, just very, very quickly. Favorite painting? If you could do an art heist and you could have any painting in the world, and money was no object, size was no object, anything, what would you have?
I think you know what my favourite
painting is. I think we've discussed it.
It's William de Kooning, Door to the River. It's exquisite, huge, luscious pink and green, and it's literally this structural leading you through the paint is just the most dynamic and heartwarming and just incredible painting. I never ever get bored looking at it.
It's stunning, isn't it? Yes.
And the way he uses pink with no sickliness, but in a fleshly, light way, it's just never stops.
It's never too much, is it? It's never kind of, it's never sort of sickly, or it's perfect.
That's the way he uses pink, and I think it probably reminds me of the pink in things like Titian, and those soft skies and those sunsets and sunrises and bodies and flesh, and it's like a real combination, everything in nature, from flesh and light.
It's a combination of the body and that kind of nature, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking of those ones he painted. I can't remember the names of them, but the ones he painted out in Connecticut, and the kind of absolutely beautiful kind of nature ones as well. Is it Lewis Point?
Yes.
You know the one I mean? I can't remember the exact time.
I do.
But then there's women as well.
The amazing women, which some people thought were a little bit
misogynistic.
Can't think of the right, misogynistic, but I don't see it like that.
Incredibly powerful.
Choose not to see it like that. They're so powerful.
Okay, Kate, we probably need to stop now. Thank you very much. That's been really interesting.
It's been brilliant. I thank you for those great questions. I'm going to have to ask you for a copy of them so I can do the same for you.
Yeah, absolutely.